Hi guys! Say hi as you come on so I know who's here. Hi Erin! Hi Melissa! Hey Kelsey! I'm so glad you made it. Hi Lori! While we wait for a couple more people to join, if you guys have any questions from yesterday or the day before, hi Robin! Feel free to drop those in the comments and then I can address those before we get started with trail and ultra running. Or if you have any other questions in general. Hey Liz! Hi Sarah! Okay, so thank you all for coming to the final night of this series. This has been so fun, and this is my favorite day because we're talking about trail running and ultra running, which are two of my favorite topics. So, just get started, I want to start with just for tips to get into trail running in case we have any new trail runners here. So, first off, just 2 points of trail etiquette when you start going on trails instead of roads. The first, if you're trying to pass a runner or a hiker or someone who's in front of you, hi Lexi. Um, it's common to shout on your left or some other variation of which side you'll pass them on so that they know that you are there and trying to pass. Similar to if you're like on a bike path and a biker usually says on your left as they pass you. And the other one I think is important that not everyone, hi Devin, always remembers is the who yields to who on the trails. So bikes are supposed to yield to us runners and hikers, which if you've run on trails, you know doesn't always happen. And then we're supposed to yield to horses who yield to bikes. So keeping that in mind as you're running and encountering other people and creatures on the trail. Um, Also, if you are running with your headphones in, try to only have one in so that you can hear what's going on around you for when people do want to pass you or if there's any wildlife around or anything like that. Just to stay present and aware of your surroundings. And I know we have some experienced trail runners in here, so if there's any other tips that I don't cover, feel free to drop them in the comments as you think of them, because that would be helpful to people too. So if you're, hi Chelsea, if you're going out on a trail alone, tell someone where you're going just in case something happens, they will know where to look. This is just for a safety precaution, similar to having only one headphone in. Um, I also like to have Trail Run Project on my phone and I download the data for the area where I'll be so that I can pull up the map just to make sure that I'm on the trail and so that I don't get lost, which is especially important if you're on a new trail or a new area that you're not familiar with. And then along with that, in case you do get lost or if you're out longer than expected, make sure you carry more nutrition and hydration than you think you need. One time I was on a long run in Moab, which is, if you're not familiar, the desert, and I only had two 16-ounce handhelds and I was supposed to go for 16 miles. Needless to say, I ran out of water and almost fainted at the trailhead, so we don't want that happening to any of you. So make sure you carry enough food and hydration just in case you are out longer and don't have a water source. And then my last tip, which also applies to going with other runners, research and be knowledgeable of the wildlife in the area that you may encounter and how to deal with that encounter. Knowledge is power, and if you're like me, it can be really scary to go to a trail, especially out in the mountains in Colorado, because I've run into moose before and I haven't seen a mountain lion, but a bunch of my friends have, and it's kind of scary thinking you could run into them alone. But knowing what to do in those situations is really helpful, just so that you are more prepared in case you do find yourself in that situation. So like when I ran into a moose, I was running around a bend and I saw this big black spot. Kelsey also carries a defensive device on long runs. Yeah, that's smart too. Highly recommend. So I was running around this bend and then I see this big black figure in my peripheral view, and I look to my left and there's this giant moose like 3 feet away from my face, and it was terrifying, needless to say. But I had read about moose before, and I knew that you were supposed to go hide behind a tree if a tree is around, since their eyes are like on the sides of their heads. So I like dove behind an aspen, and luckily that was my first instinct. So having that knowledge can really help you when you get in those situations. And if you are going on a trail for the first time, I would recommend that you don't choose a technical trail. And by technical, I just mean something that is super steep and or super rocky or has a lot of loose roots. If you do go on a technical trail, it will just increase your chances of injury or falling. And it could kind of make you hate trail running because you'll go a lot slower, and if you do fall and hurt yourself, you will probably be less likely to want to go again in the future. But trail running is really fun, so we don't want anyone to have a bad first experience. So along that same vein, if you want to find good trails that are suited for more beginners, I like to look on Trail Run Project, just at trails that are around me, and you can see, usually there are pictures and trail reports on there of people who have run on the trail, and it tells you the percentage that is runnable. So the higher the percentage, the more of the trail you can run, which probably means it's less technical, which is good for first timers. You can also use All Trails, that's another app. Sometimes that has more trails because some trails are just labeled for hiking but not running, but you know, trail running is just fast hiking, and sometimes the same thing. And as we're all on Facebook right now, local trail running Facebook groups are a really great place to get recommendations for good trails around your area, especially because all of the people that I've encountered in Facebook groups that I've ever asked for help, they're always super willing to give me advice and to share their knowledge of the area, which is really nice. So with regards to switching from road running to trail running, some of these I've mentioned yesterday and the day before, so they might be a bit of a repeat, but they're always worth saying again. First, walk when you need to. There's no shame in walking. We all walk on trail runs, especially up hills, and oftentimes power hiking is more efficient than running when you're going up a hill. And you will be using different muscles than when you're on the roads due to the uneven surfaces, so you'll get a little more fatigue than normal, your pace will be slower than normal, and all of this is normal. So it's good to alter your expectations and kind of leave your ego at home. Just go on a trail run with the intent of having fun and getting out in a new area and just seeing what trail running is like compared to road running, and don't worry about pace or mileage or time or anything that we constantly check on our road runs. And then just the last tip for converting from road running to trail running is to consider more than just mileage. Trail runs, as I mentioned, your pace will probably be slower, so covering the same distance as on a road will take quite a bit longer, and that extra time on your feet is a lot more stress on your body. So with trail runs, it's sometimes better to think about time on feet versus strict mileage. And that can help with your mindset a lot too. Just accepting that if you want it to be comparable to a road run, you're going to go less distance for comparable times. So Devin submitted a question to me. She said she is afraid of getting lost during a trail race, and that's her major deterrent to not doing a trail race. So, Devin, some of my tips to you are, first, if you could find a local trail race, that would be really great, because then you would have the chance to do some training runs on the actual course, so you could become familiar with the course and familiar with the turns you need to take, so that you could better make sure you won't take a wrong turn somewhere and end up, like you said of your horror stories you've heard about, a mile down the wrong path. If you can't find a local trail race, studying the course map is really helpful. Then you'll know where to expect any forks in the trail, because that's usually where people get lost. Usually if the trail doesn't veer off anywhere, your chances of getting off of the trail are pretty small. But yeah, just knowing where the turns are can help. And usually, in my experience, trail races are really well marked. So if you're paying attention, and even more so if you're worried about getting lost, you're probably paying attention more than the average trail runner in that race, you are probably less likely to get lost, especially compared to a normal trail run where the trail isn't specifically marked for a race. And if you have any trail runner friends, if you get one of them to run with you, then you might feel a little better having someone who is there with you to help you not get lost. And then my final two tips, if none of the above would work, if Trail Run Project has your course on there, you could download the area and have your phone with you so you can periodically check where you are on the trail. Or similarly, if you can get the course GPX file, a lot of watches will allow you to upload that file so that the course will then be on your watch so that you can periodically check. So Devin, let me know if those help and which ones specifically help you the most. So now we're going to move on to talking about ultra running. If you guys have any questions about trail running in general, I know a lot of you are already seasoned trail runners, but drop them in the comments at any time. So I want to start out with telling you guys how I got into ultra running, because I think that a lot of people, and women especially, are kind of afraid to sign up for their first ultra, whether it's because you doubt that you can do it. Oh yeah, Devin, you should be brave and sign up. We all in this group fully support you. Liz and I actually were talking about this probably about a month ago now. We think a lot of women either aren't familiar with the fact that ultras exist, or they don't have a lot of other women in their life that they've seen do it, so they don't think it's possible for them to do it. So I just want to tell you guys, I signed up for my first 50K in early 2016. The longest race I had done before that was in 2012, so 4 years prior. It was only a half marathon. And my longest run ever before signing up for my 50K was only 14 miles. So by no means was I, running really far, and I hadn't done a marathon, and I went straight to the 50K and survived. So if you have any doubts about if you can do it, if you give yourself ample time to train and you really want to do it, you can 100% do it. And hopefully some of the tips that I have for you today will help you feel more confident if you're afraid to sign up. Yeah, Lori says it helps the first time to sign up and run with a friend. Yeah, I don't know why I signed up alone, but mainly because none of my friends run ultras. But yes, it would be better to run with a friend, especially for training runs. Some of my longer runs got really, really boring, and I wish I had someone there with me. So that's a good tip, Lori. So then for actually training for an ultra, first give yourself ample time to train. So Erin asked what is the average amount of time they should train for a 50K, and specifically Erin's coming back from an injury. So like all of my answers, it depends. But oh, Kelsey, yes, getting lost happens. I ran a race and ended up adding on 1.5 miles. If not running with a friend, stick with someone at a similar pace. Yeah, good way to meet new friends. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, trail races are so fun, so Devin, highly recommend signing up for one. Okay, so back to Erin. So if you're not including your base period and you're coming back from injury, a conservative amount of months to train for a 50K would probably be around 4 to 5. So just as a reminder, or in case anyone wasn't here yesterday, the training blocks for an ultra usually go from least specific to most specific. And so you start with your base. Liz says, figuring out that everybody walks in an ultra was a game changer. I was hiking at a state park when an ultra was going on and saw all the front runners stop and walk, and I was like, oh, well, I could do that if I can walk sometimes. Yeah, exactly. All of us walk, and just because you sign up for a 50K doesn't mean you're running 31 miles without any walking breaks or breaks at all. Okay, so back to training blocks. So you start out with your base, building your aerobic capacity, and then usually next is working on your VO2 max, which is when you focus on those high intensity running intervals, because that is least specific to ultras, because ultras are low intensity for a long time. And then after that block, you usually go into your threshold block, where you work on tempo runs and improving your body's ability to utilize and clear lactate. And then the final block closest to your race is your endurance block, which is most specific to your ultra, and that's where you focus on sustained efforts for long periods of time. So with that in mind, back to Erin, without that first base phase, the other 3 blocks in 4 to 5 months would be a pretty conservative time range for training for a 50K. Usually you could train as little as 4 months for probably up to a 50 miler, and then anywhere up to probably like 9 to 12 for the longer races. And if you throw in the base block, that would be even longer. But just like everything else, it depends how your body responds to the training. If you respond really well, then your blocks don't have to be as long as for someone who takes a little longer to recover and adapt. Or if you've already built your base pretty well and you're pretty aerobically fit, that would also reduce the time you'd need to train. But as a general answer, hopefully that helped, Erin. And then something I just learned in my ultra running certificate that I found really interesting. So the minimum amount of time per week that you need to train for 50K and 50 miler is at least 6 hours per week for 3 weeks, starting 6 weeks before your race. So if you think about that, 6 hours of running in 1 week really isn't that much. Erin, this gives me more hope for not totally crushing myself by doing 50K in the early fall. No, I think you have ample time, and you're doing that half marathon in the summer first, so I think you'll have a good progression going, and I think you're going to crush it. So back to weekly training times. So a lot of people think that you just have to be running literally all the time in order to do ultras, but the minimum stimulus that you need is a lot lower than most of us think, which is kind of cool. And that's not to say that everyone needs to only do 6 hours per week. Some people should do a little more, and that might even make you feel more confident to do a little more running. But if you can only fit in 6 weeks or 6 hours per week close to the race, then that's pretty cool. And then for the 100K and 100 miler, the minimum amount is at least 9 hours per week for 6 weeks, starting 9 weeks before the race. And you'll notice with each of these minimum times that allows for a 3-week taper right before your race. So now that we've talked about time, we're going to go back to the training blocks for just a minute. Just touch on it again. So least specific to most specific. And you do want to add intensity to your program. We talked about this yesterday, but for anyone who wasn't here, even though ultras are really long and a really low intensity, we still want to work on raising our VO2 max pace, which is our ceiling pace. Basically, our VO2 max pace is above our lactate threshold pace, and if we raise one, we can raise the other, and that also makes your easy running even easier. And since we're running at a low intensity, the speed will help make that low intensity running even easier, and you'll be able to handle more. So even for us really far runners, we want to include running intervals and tempo runs together, and not just our really long back-to-back runs. So as we get closer to the race, as I mentioned, the endurance block is the block just before the race, and that's when we want to focus on the aspects that are more specific to our race. And that can mean the elevation, the terrain. If your race is at altitude and you're not, trying to get up to altitude would happen then. Acclimating to heat if your race is in a hot area and you're not in a hot area. And that's also when you would focus a lot on your back-to-back runs. So if you're not familiar with back-to-back runs, I found these really helpful when I was training for my ultra. So basically they're just what they sound like. Usually it's on Saturday and Sunday. You do your longest run Saturday and then a shorter long run on Sunday. So this helps you get used to running while you're really tired and your legs are really tired. It helps you develop the mental toughness that you'll need in your ultra, and it gives you a lot of confidence, especially at the 50K level. So when I was training for my first 50K, my longest back-to-back weekend was a 20 miler on Saturday and a 10 miler that next Sunday. And so completing that, I felt a lot more confident going into the 50K because I knew I could cover that distance, or I had covered that distance in 2 days. So I felt more likely to be able to cover it in, the one day for my race. And my goal was just to finish, so I wasn't worried about a certain time or anything, which helped. So I just want to touch on altitude and heat acclimation really quick in case anyone here will have to deal with that. So if you don't live out here in Denver like me, or at higher elevations like some of my friends, then you are probably not acclimated to the altitude, and it is recommended if you're going to a race at altitude, if you can, to arrive at your race destination a week in advance to get acclimated a little bit. And if you can't go out a week in advance, it's recommended you try to arrive the night before or the morning of, basically as close to the race as possible, because usually you feel the worst 24 to 72 hours after arriving at altitude. So the closer you arrive to the race, the more of a chance you have to run without feeling your shittiest, basically. And alternatively, if you could come out like 2 weeks before your race, usually the effects, you'd have to stay here for a bit. That's the caveat. But the effects of altitude acclimation last for up to 15 days after returning to sea level. So you have a couple options if you have to deal with altitude. And then there's always, those altitude tents we've all heard about, but it's debatable how much they actually help you, and plus they're pretty expensive. So for heat acclimation, it takes about 2 weeks to fully acclimate to heat, and the bulk of adaptations actually occur in 6 to 7 days. So if you can only get a week of heat acclimation, that's better than nothing. And then the other thing about that is you start to lose your adaptations 48 hours after your last exposure to heat. So a good way to get ready for a heat race is every third day to do a workout that exposes you to heat if possible. The best way is if it's actually hot outside, naturally, but if you don't have access to that, you could go for an easy run and then sit in the sauna for around 20 minutes, and that would give you that little bit of heat exposure that would help. Devin said, I ran Boulder 10K, my lungs felt like I'd never run a day in my life. Yeah, altitude sucks. So I'm originally from Maryland, so everyone who's at sea level, I understand. When I first moved out here, this is a little sidebar. So I came out here right after college to go to grad school, and I ran on the cross country team in college, so I was pretty used to running relatively fast and far on the regular. And then I came out here, I remember the first month, I would go for a run and I would last 30 minutes and that was all I could do. And yeah, it was quite a shock to the system. Altitude is no joke. Okay, so a couple more tips for ultra training. Practice downhill running. I don't know if any of you feel the same way as me, but I am terrified of running downhill, mostly because I suck at it. But the more you practice it, the better you'll get. And the reason you want to practice downhill running is because oftentimes it's not the elevation going up that kills people, it's going down, because there's a lot more strain on your quads and people don't realize that until they're bombing down a hill and then super sore. So ways to get better at downhill running is to practice taking smaller, quicker steps and not leaning back so that you're essentially braking less, and try to take quiet steps and look down the trail so you're not just staring at your feet the whole time. So if you can practice this on pretty much any trail run, and you don't have to go out with the intent of just doing downhill repeats. But if you find a good hill, then you can run down it a couple times, and each time try to make your footsteps quieter than your last time down. And that will help a lot. So we talked about this a couple times this week, but don't worry about completing your training perfectly, because in the real world you're probably not going to. Consistency is always better than perfection, and one workout or one long run in the grand scheme of all of your training will have almost no effect on your race result. So what matters more is putting in the consistent work that will compound on itself and build up to your race. And in the book I used when I was running my first ultra, the author said if you do 70 to 80% of your training, then you'll be ready, which I really took to heart. But just keep that in mind if you're ever stressing about not completing a workout or cutting a long run short or having to skip something because your life or work required something of you instead of going running. And enjoy the process, which is super cliche, but training for an ultra takes a long time, and if you're not enjoying the process, then why are you doing it? Not to say that every day is going to be sunshine and rainbows, because there will be highs, there will be lows, but overall it should be pretty fun. And along the same line of thinking, know your why and have a support system. This will really help you when you are having those lows in your training, and it will help you push through when you want to stop in your long runs, in a hard workout, or in your race. And just making sure you have a support system of people that support what you're doing and think it's really cool what you're doing, I find is really helpful. When I was training, none of my friends really ran ultras or cared about running, so it was a little hard because you get so immersed in it and that's all you want to talk about sometimes. And all of my friends at the time were climbers and they were always talking about climbing, and I was just like, yeah, can we talk about trail running maybe? But so having people you can talk to, so hopefully like this group, when you guys start training and signing up for races, I hope this can be a place where you talk about what you're doing and ask questions, and we can all support each other, because that would be really awesome, I think. Especially if you don't have, like me, you don't have that many friends except Kelsey and Emery who trail run with you. Okay, so this next tip is very, 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 very important. You need to have and practice a nutrition plan. So since ultras are so far and so long, you're going to need to be eating during them, or you're just going to hit the wall and not recover. And you need to make sure you're practicing what you're eating on your training runs so that you can find foods that don't upset your stomach, because GI distress is one of the top reasons that people don't complete their ultras. And you have a better chance of completing your ultra if you go through the heinousness in a training run rather than on race day. So when you're getting started figuring out what works for your body, eating every 45 minutes is a good place to start, and then adjusting from there based on how you feel. Some people will need to eat more often, some people less often, but it's always recommended you eat at least once per hour, unless you literally can't stomach anything. And as far as how much to eat each hour, a good place to start is around 250 calories per hour, and then adjusting from there. And you can have up to 90 grams of carbs per hour, but on average, people usually have around 20 to 50 carbs per hour. 90 is quite high, but it depends on your body and your race. So some of my favorites are these little packets from Spring Energy. So like this one is 250 calories, so this would be good. Have one of these each hour or every 45 minutes. And they have a lot of different flavors. They have different calorie amounts. It's really nice, and it's all made of real food, which is why I like it, and it tastes good. I also like Picky bars if you want to kind of like feel like you're actually eating something, because the Spring Energy is more like applesauce baby food texture, which is good for when you're on the go. It's really easy to get down quickly. But sometimes you kind of want to chew things, you know? But yeah, find what works for you, test it on your long runs, and make sure you're eating consistently. So some watches, I'm actually not sure if any of the other brands except Coros do this yet, but Coros there's an option for a nutrition alert. So every 45 minutes, my watch will start nagging me about nutrition, which is really cool because then I don't have to think about it. You could also put an alarm on your phone, I'm sure. That would be a little more cumbersome, but that would be possible as well if you are not good at keeping track. Or if you have a crew at your race, this is a good, or a pacer. Part of their job to help you is to help you or remind you to stay on top of your nutrition and your hydration. And with that, don't neglect your hydration. Hydration is arguably more important than your nutrition. And you need to make sure that you are also replacing your electrolytes to help you remain hydrated. And it's recommended to take in 15 to 25 ounces per hour, depending on how much you sweat. So all of this is basically just good places to start, but since we're all different, you'll have to find what works best for your body, but hopefully these starting points will be helpful. So along with practicing your nutrition, you also want to practice the gear and clothes that you're going to wear on race day. So with your vest, make sure you like your vest. It doesn't rub you anywhere, it doesn't feel uncomfortable, it doesn't bounce in a weird way. We're going to talk about a little more about gear later, but the vest is one you want to test. Your trail shoes, obviously. Just like most other races, the recommendation is not to wear new shoes on race day. But you could find a pair you like, buy a second pair, and break them in a little bit before the race, and then they're pretty new. In some longer races, Robin says don't suggest salt tabs. Yeah, I've heard mixed reviews on those. I think I use those a little bit in my ultra training, but not in my race. But I don't know if they helped or hurt. I can't remember. And I'm not sure of any research on those, but I'm gonna make a note to look some information up for you. Where was I? Oh yeah, practicing your gear and your clothes. Yeah, make sure that you practice your clothes on your long runs. Some things on shorter runs don't bother you, but then once you're way past double digits, it might bother you. Kelsey says, also, if anyone here has trouble with solids, GU, Roctane, or Tailwind has a complete nutrition drink. I also salt tabs in my water. Yeah, I use Tailwind at my race, but actually I didn't test it in my training, so I don't really recommend what I did. I got really lucky. Okay, Lexi says, how do you know if you're drinking enough water? Both during the run and after, I have a hard time knowing what to look for. So you can do, the most common way to know if you're drinking enough water is just like if you're looking to see if you're hydrated on any normal day, you know, doing like the pee test to make sure your urine is pale and it doesn't smell. That's a good way. Usually if you start to get dehydrated, your heart rate will start rising. You will probably start feeling a little lightheaded. You know, there's some other symptoms I'm forgetting. So I'll follow up with you, Lexi. But after a run, I think it's recommended that you get at least 15 ounces in within 30 minutes, if I remember correctly. So making sure basically you drink within the first 30 minutes after a run. Aaron says, I like Nuun for electrolyte replacement. I have Nuun in this water bottle. Always helps me on long hikes and backpacking trips and after really sweaty workouts. Yeah, I like Nuun a lot. I've recently started using liquid IV sometimes, but I think I like Nuun better actually. But for some people, the Nuun isn't sweet enough, and liquid IV is a little sweeter because there's a little more sugar. But yeah, all of these are good options. I think, let's see, Scratch Labs also has a hydration drink, and Gnarly Nutrition. So there are lots of options out there. So I would say if you aren't taking strict water on your runs, just test out the different options that you have and see which makes you feel the best. And maybe do like an average over a week, because day to day you might feel not so good, but one day of feeling bad doesn't mean the product isn't working well. Kelsey, yes, Nuun and liquid IV, they're so good, so good. Okay, so my next tip for you guys is don't neglect your mental training. Mental toughness is so important when you're running an ultra. Lori says, I like Scratch, no artificial sweeteners. Yeah, I don't think I've tried Scratch yet, but I have a discount as a coach, so I think I will have to. So, mental training. A lot of times your mind will give up before your body gives up. So it's important that you are strong enough mentally to make yourself keep going. Unless, obviously, you want to drop out of your race, in which case we support you. So ways to do this are training in less than ideal conditions. So forcing yourself to go on a run even if it's raining, super windy, hailing, maybe not hailing, that could be dangerous. Maybe light hail. Snowing, you guys get what I'm saying. If it's not, sunny and like 50 degrees, the perfect conditions, forcing yourself to go, or in the dark, if you have to run in the dark, as long as you're being safe. Also pushing through when you want to stop, whether it's in your long run, in a hard workout, even an easy run, unless you get hurt or injured or something traumatic happens, then obviously you should stop. But if it's just pure lack of motivation or being fatigued, then pushing yourself through can help with that mental toughness. If you intentionally want to do some mental training, you could run a boring loop. So instead of doing like a 5-mile loop run, find a small 1-mile loop and just do 5 repeats of that. A lot of people find repetition to be boring, but that is a way to mentally train yourself and make yourself go running even if you don't want to, unless you're injured or overtrained. Obviously, we don't want you to get into the red zone, but on the days where you're just really tired, really not feeling it, but you go out anyway. And if your race will take place overnight, make sure you, if you can, if you feel safe, get in some runs at night, or at least one run at night, just to get used to moving through the night and staying awake and get your mind ready for that. A lot of times, I think it's like 3 to 5 a.m. tend to be the hardest time of night for people who have to run overnight. So mentally being tough and remembering why you're doing it will be super important during that time. So my final training tip is, this applies to other races as well, respect the taper. So a lot of people have trouble with scaling back their running in the weeks before their race, but that's when your body repairs micro tears in your muscles and connective tissues. It increases your glycogen stores, which means more fuel for race day. You'll increase your mental freshness, decrease your chance for injury and sickness. You'll increase your red blood cell and total blood volume. So basically, you're just getting really ready to perform on race day. And on average, if you use a taper versus not using a taper, you will see a 1 to 3% increase in performance, which is pretty cool. So then on race day, or getting there, if you have drop bags, so the bags that you can pre-fill that the volunteers at the race will take to certain aid stations for you, treat those like you treat a checked bag when you're flying. And what I mean by that is don't put in things that you absolutely need in them in case something happens. Like a volunteer forgets to grab your bag, something gets lost, it gets misplaced. Anything you really need, make sure that you carry it with yourself or that your crew carries it with them if you have a crew. And this little tip it's a very little one, but it can be really helpful. When you're pinning your bib on yourself, pin it to your pack or your bottom layer, like your pants, if you only have one layer down there, because you're probably going to be dressing in layers. So if you pin it to your outer layer on top, then every time you want to take off a layer, you're going to unpin, take off your layer, repin, and then if you want to put that layer back on, repeat, which can be super annoying. So a small thing most people don't think about until it's happening. Pin it on a layer you won't be taking off or your pack, because that will always be on your back. And start your race slower than you think you should. This is especially important the longer your race is, because you're going to be out there for a long time, so you don't want to blow up in the beginning, even though you're going to be super excited, super jazzed, adrenaline will be flowing through your veins, but try to maintain a low level even at the start. And throughout your race, stick to your race plan for how hard you're planning on running, whether you do, it's recommended you go off the RPE scale just because of trail terrain, ups and downs, and stick to your nutrition plan as much as you can. And if you get to later in the race and you feel really good, then you can speed up because there is less risk since you are so close to the finish. But if you feel really great at the beginning, don't speed up then because you still have a lot of ground to cover and anything can happen. So there's a lot more risk at the beginning of the race than at the end. And then this last tip is just from me. Take a moment to acknowledge how badass you are for training and racing an ultra. It's so amazing what you did in training, what you're about to do at your race, and it deserves a moment of respect from you. Yeah, this one is big, I think. We all get so caught up in training and racing, we forget, yeah, my body's about to run 31 or 66 or 100 miles all in one go, It's really cool. Okay, so if you have any questions, as you guys have been doing, drop them in. But now we're just going to talk about some gear really quick. So, with the vest. So this is the one that I currently like. It's the Osprey Dyna 6. It holds 6 liters, I believe. That's what the 6 is for. So things to consider when you're choosing a vest. The pockets, how many are accessible, and total storage. So this one has 2 big compartments, and then there's 2 flat pockets, 2 zipper pockets on the front. So there's a good amount of storage. Another thing you want to consider is if you want to use a bladder or the bottles. So I have the bladder in here, as you can see. I like the bladder for carrying more water, but in a race setting, they are a little more cumbersome to refill than the bottles since they're just in your front pouch. So that will be more of how long your race is, how often Lexi, yeah, this vest is great. How long your race is, how many aid stations there are, the distance between the aid stations. If they're not that far apart, you might not need to carry a full bladder's worth, but yeah, a lot of that. Also take into consideration how the vest fits. So if you can buy your vest from a place where you can return it after wearing it. So I got my first vest at REI, which has the 1-year return policy, which is great. So I used an Ultimate Direction at first, and it was not the best. It bounced around a lot and got quite annoying after long distances. So highly recommend being able to try out your vest. And then keep in mind how it will fit with different layers. So like when you have a base layer, a lighter layer, and then a jacket, then your vest will fit a lot tighter than if you're just wearing a tank top. And if your vest is too big, but you're running a summer race and you're going to only be wearing a few layers, like a tank top and a light top, then your vest might be too big in that case. Alternatively, if you have a race with a lot of weather changes, like whether you're running up peaks and it'll be really cold up there, but then you're running back down and it'll be warm, so you need a lot of layers. If your vest is too small, it might be too tight when you have all of your layers on. So all of this is just things to keep in mind. It'll depend on what race you're doing, where you're training, all of that, but some things to keep in mind. Another thing I like is this Garmin InReach. I started carrying this last year. It helps me, hey Dre, it helps me feel safer when I'm out on remote trails by myself because I know I'll be able to contact someone if anything should happen. God forbid. But yeah, safety devices I think are very important, especially in trail running, because a lot of times we are out on remote trails without service. So we need a way to contact our people. Clothing, I'm not going to go over too much since we're all runners. I'm sure we all have our favorite clothes and they will carry over to trails. Just keep in mind layers, like I've mentioned a lot tonight, and make sure you're wearing moisture wicking clothing, as we've all been told our whole lives getting into running. And make sure you have a good pair of socks. Socks are very important. And same with shoes. Make sure your trail shoes fit well and they're comfortable. And you could get a trail shoe with tread that is specific to the terrain that you'll be training or racing on. But a lot of trail shoes have tread that's good on multiple terrain. So if you are newer to ultras or trail running, don't worry too much about the tread. But if you like nerding out on shoes, then you might want to dig in deeper. And then always carry your nutrition, which we covered already. The Spring Energy is my favorite. I'll be doing a giveaway after this at the very end. So some of you can also try if you haven't already, or just buy your favorites if you already have some. Okay, and then I have a list of a bunch of little things. Ooh, Erin says, what are your thoughts on compression socks? I have a few friends that wear them for long runs. So compression socks are, Kelsey says, love the Garmin InReach or the DAD. Oh, I haven't heard of the DAD. That's cool. So that one can also access help or search and rescue. Good to know. So compression socks, there is mixed research on whether they actually help you or if it's just a placebo effect, but the bottom line is they don't hurt you. So if you believe that they're helping you, then they probably are. So I've never worn them personally on a run, but oftentimes when my calves are sore after a run, I'll wear them like for the rest of the night or the day, depending on when I finish my run. But yeah, you can find studies that tell you that increases circulation to your calves, which helps, and then you can find other studies which tell you that they do absolutely nothing. So it's just personal preference. So some little things. Dre says, I love wearing them after run/overnight. Yeah, after runs is what I like too. They feel so comforting, just squeezing your sore calves, which is a weird thing to say, but Kelsey says, I wear them on every run over 6 miles, but I get calf cramping and I believe it to help me. Mixed evidence from what I know. Yep, what Kelsey said. Okay, so some little things that if you haven't encountered some of these issues yet, you might not know about, but I'm sure a lot of you have. So first, anti-chafing cream. Super important. If you've ever run in shorts, or in my case, a skirt, and your legs rub together, very uncomfortable. Or sometimes my vest will rub if I'm wearing a tank top, and then it'll chafe under my arms, and that's also very uncomfortable. So squirrel's nut butter is the one that I like. I think it works better than Body Glide, which I used to use a lot. So that's a little pro tip. Always carry chapstick, especially if you are on a really sunny run. It only takes one time of not having chapstick in the middle of like a 10-miler when your lips are absolutely dying. So I always have a little tube of chapstick that lives in my vest so that I never forget it. Sunglasses, my favorite are Gooder. I don't know how you guys feel about them. These are my favorite pair. If you follow me on Instagram, you've probably seen these in so many posts because I wear them literally every trail run. And they have really cool names for their sunglasses. If you're not a sunglasses person, wear a hat. Always wear sunscreen, especially for those of us out here at altitude, because the sunburn is very real and very painful. I would say if you're going out for your first longer runs, bring some headphones just in case you need some extra motivation towards the end. But like I said before, don't wear both at once. Just to be aware of your surroundings and respectful of everyone else. Dre loves Gooder too. They're so good. So good. This last one, where is it? I don't know if any of you guys have heard of this, a Kula cloth. So I know a lot of people don't really mind it, but I personally hate peeing outside. Like, hate it. But this is an antibacterial little cloth that makes it a lot more enjoyable, and then you actually have something to wipe yourself with, which is nice. So that's a little pro tip. I don't know if any of you guys agree with me, but if anyone out there does, try the Kula cloth. And then last two things, if you will be running in the dark, make sure that you have a good headlamp and or a waist lamp. So a lot of people, when they're running at night with the headlamp bobbing with them as they run, they get kind of, not seasick, nauseous. They get kind of nauseous. So a waist lamp can help in those cases because it's a little more stable on your waist rather than your head. And it will light up the trail in front of you better than just your headlamp. And then the last thing that you may or may not want to try for an ultra are trekking poles. So these aren't necessary by any means, but they can be good for technical terrain just to spread out the fatigue from just your legs to your upper body too, because you'll be able to pull with your arms. But in order to use these efficiently, you need to be able to and be willing to train with them and get used to them. So yeah, those are more of personal preference and depending on your race, but also know the race rules, because I know some races don't allow you to have trekking poles on the race course. So yeah, curious if any of you guys have used trekking poles before.